Welcome to Books Boys, live from the Grand Library, the Dean and PJ.
He's PJ.
Hello there, everyone.
I'm the Dean, and we are the Books Boys.
The one and only, unique.
This is the Books Boys show. Get it? Buy it? Books.
Books. Still not quite sure what it's all about, Dean. Do you? Books. Keep thinking
It's a
of
tricky
toilet
one. You know,
paper
people stop me in the street when I'm wearing my delicious Books Boys t-shirt, and they say, "Oh, I like the alliteration, but I don't understand what the words mean. What are the books?" You know,
right,
they thought I was doing some accounting, you know, with my bookkeeper or something. They didn't understand. Yeah,
They like the logo, guys. Dean is wearing a T-shirt. I must say, it's a smashing T-shirt. You guys can also get one.
you can indeed. We should actually explain. You can get a Books Boys t-shirt on the top tier of our Patreon. And while we're mentioning it, let's just explain. So you get your monthly Books Boys show, and you love it, and that's grand. But if you want more, you can go to patreon.com/booksboys. Not only do you get the main show a day or two early, but you also get the Caper Captains, the Playboys, Renaissance. On higher tiers, you can even tell us which books to read or get yourself a free t-shirt. So much content, so little time.
So, guys, we've got already 6 Shakespeare episodes. We've got one special Renaissance episode, which we'll talk about in a second, and a few more to come very soon. Caper Captains we've got, and we have got. Oh, and don't forget, we have got from your archives, Dean. We've
got the
episodes.
interviews from the vault. That's right. We've got musician interviews from the vault. There's one Poetry Pals up there that we did with Sunny from the Written Word.
Nice.
Very soon there's going to be a special. We can talk about it now. We didn't want to talk about it last month. There's going to be a special Film Fellows coming very soon. So
that'll be the first in a series of film book episodes we'll be talking about, and we'll have 2 special guests, Dean, right?
Yeah, we're going to have a crossover show with the Two Chicks Talking Flicks podcast. So that's going to be very, very interesting. And that's going to be coming out very, very soon, probably in the next week or so. So yeah, so much content, guys. So get it, buy it, books.
And it'll be the book lads against the film girls. So who will win this battle?
Well, guys, I have to warn you. Go to booksboys.com. Go to patreon.com/booksboys, but never go to the literatures.gov. They are the enemy. They are here to subvert, and they are trying to take over. So avoid the literatures.gov.
Literature lads, the arch enemies.
Right? We don't need it.
The dark counterparts of Books Boys.
That's
shadowy
it.
figures.
We could do without that. I think we could do without that.
Yeah, do without that. Now then,
this month, we are joined in the webcam chat by a little ballerina.
Oh. Who's this?
There we go. Get involved in that if you can, which you can't. PJ, how are you?
I'm doing great, yeah. How's it going with you?
I'm great. I'm loving doing some of our bonus shows, and
You're enjoying that,
got some books to talk about today.
Indeed.
Shall I start?
Yeah, go ahead. So you start. So what was the first book you read this month?
I wanted to continue with my little trend from last month, where I read Pride and Prejudice, you may remember. I said I promised a Jane Austen this month, and I delivered twofold. So first I read Sense and Sensibility. Now, this is 1811, so this is before Pride and Prejudice. This is Jane Austen's first book. The author at the time was just listed as a lady. It didn't say who she was. Actually, she never said who she was in her books. Her future books then all just said by the author of Sense and Sensibility. So you never got a book with Jane Austen's name on it.
Is that right? Okay. Any particular reason did she not want the fame?
I mean, she was still making money for the books to an extent, so I guess that side of things was fine. It was very difficult for women writers, I mean, at the time.
Yeah, I forgot about that, of course, yeah.
You know, I guess they knew she was a woman, so I don't really understand why the need for anonymity. Maybe it was frowned upon.
Perhaps, yeah. I don't think George George Eliot didn't start writing yet to another few years, into quite like 50 years later. So
Yeah.
and the Bronte sisters wouldn't write for another 10 years at least. So I mean, she was really not the first of a kind, but there weren't too many women authors.
Well, the thing is, thing about Jane Austen is we're talking early 1800s. It's early stuff. It's earlier than most of the other kind of what you would think of as contemporaries. She did come first, and I do have to ask: is she the first great novelist?
Okay. Well, I don't know.
Because we have some earlier novels, of course, but I think she's the first big one that's still remembered and widely read. She's the earliest kind of lasting great novelist.
Well, she's maybe the first kind of novelist who you read for several books. You know what I mean? Like because of several books. Not like you read Daniel Defoe just for Robinson Crusoe, even though he wrote a few other. You read Fielding for Tom Jones, maybe. And
that's what I mean. But people are still reading almost all of Jane Austen's works, if not all.
Yeah. So I mean, almost all of them. And I think you're going to talk about the least popular one after this as well. So I'm interested about that. So tell me about Sense and Sensibility. What were your impressions of this?
I tell you what, I liked it. I liked it a little bit more than Pride and Prejudice.
Okay.
I'll be honest, because Pride and Prejudice I thought was overrated. The problem with Pride and Prejudice was the first half, nothing really happened, and then it picked up in the second half. This one, it's the exact opposite. It starts out a lot better, and then it loses its way.
Oh, no.
So there needs to be some combination to kind of get it right. I don't know what was going wrong, but it lost me in the second half. So here's the premise. We have these two sisters, Marianne and Eleanor, and they have a kind of stepbrother, okay? And what happens is, the very thing that they're afraid of happening in Pride and Prejudice, the dad dies and they don't have any money to inherit. So that's the fear from Pride and Prejudice was actually already realized in Sense and Sensibility. Okay. And of course, the brother, originally he says, well, I mean, I guess I should give them some money, and he wants to give them, £1,000 each. And then his wife says, well, yeah, £1,000 each would be great. So would £500 each. That would be almost even better than giving them £1,000 each, And then he says, yes, I think 500 will be more than enough. And then she says, what would be even better than giving them 500? And it just whittles down and down. And he says, they can hardly expect more. And then he says, why don't I just give them £50 here and there, when they need it? And she says, yes, that would be great. However, to be sure, I think there was no idea of you giving them money at all, and then eventually he gives them nothing. So they end up essentially homeless and penniless, All
right. Okay. Yeah. So a lot of Victorian novels are about that too, right? Even though this is pre-Victorian, there seems to be a big thing regarding the Industrial Revolution and just like people being so insecure about money, right? Because I read this a lot, and you tell me, because you read more than I do, of 19th century British literature. Like a lot of these themes are out there, right? Like the Wilkie Collins books, Wilkie Collins book, No Name. I mean, sounds like it has the exact same premise.
Yeah, I mean, it is just this underlying premise in this genre and this kind of time period, because most of these books. So Dickens was interesting that he wrote about poorer people. Most of these books, they're writing about richer people. But even the richer people, they seem to be always afraid that they're going to lose it like at any moment.
Yeah, so
they never seem to feel very secure with it.
So there's like a big underlying fear, isn't there? And 19th century literature.
You can see why. These girls grew up, as you say, just like No Name. You grew up essentially not necessarily rich, but comfortable.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden your dad dies and you're homeless and penniless. It seems to happen very, very easily. So I understand the fear, And of course, in that time period, your dad was dying when he was like 40. So, by the time you're 20, you're homeless.
Oh my God. Yeah, totally.
So it's pretty rough, it's bad. And in the end, he says, well, I'm not going to give them any money, but I'll just help them. They can stay with us for a while. But his wife isn't nice to them. So they eventually have to move out. And he says, well, we'll help them move. That will be our charity. We'll help them move. Then they move too far. And he says, well, we can't even help them move then because they're going too far. So in the end, he does nothing. Yeah.
Okay.
He just kicks them out, basically.
Oh, for God's sake. And so what's the point of the story then, basically? So it sounds kind of very depressing, to be honest. Doesn't sound like the kind of book I would like to read.
that's the intro. But then, let's be honest. What's the point of the story? Both girls fall in love. It's a double love story.
It's a double love story. Of course it is.
So Marianne, she falls in love with Willoughby. And it's just this gentleman, they do a little bit of courting. They spend some time together. Very, very interesting. If you wanted to date someone, you essentially had to go to their parents' house and stay with them for a month, and see that if you made any connection with one of their daughters, and then leave again and write some letters. Very, very bizarre. But yeah, so
it was a weird time, right?
Marianne falls in love with Willoughby, and Eleanor falls in love with Edward, who turns out to be a kind of semi-relative type thing. But basically what happens is neither gentleman is true. So the main storyline here is that neither gentleman is actually faithful, and it turns out that they're actually both engaged to other people. So there's a double story, but neither sister tells each other or the mum. So they're both going through like a similar hardship.
Right. So they're both going through a similar turmoil, but they don't want to talk. They don't want to mention it was this upsetting because they would help each other out.
Exactly. Now, at one point, Marianne is so in love and so, wrought, she can't sleep. Marianne would have thought herself very inexcusable had she been able to sleep at all the first night after parting with Willoughby. She would have been ashamed to look her family in the face the next morning had she not risen from her bed in more need of repose than when she lay down. So, you've got to have the kind of tragic romance. You can't get a good night's sleep when you're in love.
You can't indeed. And I suppose that's what made this book a bestseller, right? Because that was, people still love these romantic, extreme kind of stories. And yeah, if the book would just start off, if the book would just leave there with, they have no money, how are they gonna survive? It would become a different kind of novel, wouldn't it? More of a Dickensian kind of thing.
Yeah. And one of the gentlemen, at one point, he wears a ring made out of the girl's hair. So he just takes a strand of her hair, curls it into a ring, and wears that, and just around town.
Okay. Okay. So nowadays it would just be considered creepy. Back then, God knows what they thought.
Yeah, pretty much. But there's some funny extra characters, PJ. There's Sir John and Mrs. Jennings and a bunch of other characters. But I have a nice little quote here. Sir John's very grumpy, and he says, "You and I, Sir John," said Mrs. Jennings, "should not stand upon such ceremony." And then Mr. Palmer says, "Then you would be very ill-bred." "My love, you contradict everybody. Do you know that you are quite rude?" And Mr. Palmer replies, "I did not know I contradicted anyone in calling your mother ill-bred." So I called her ill-bred, but that wasn't actually a contradiction to anyone, No one was arguing that she wasn't.
So there's some humor in the book as well, right?
There is some humor, yeah. There is some humor.
And tell me this, Dean, I'm not the Jane Austen expert, but Jane Austen sometimes goes a bit meta. She sometimes goes a bit kind of seems to do a lot of references to books she had read before. So particularly maybe books around 1790s, from the 1790s or 1800s.
Yes, she does. I'm going to move on in a minute to the next book, and we'll see a lot of that
because there's more in that book. But there's a bit of Sense and Sensibility in it as well. I think was that because it already started around the late 18th century. That kind of trends of like, kind of like relationships that just can't exist and like social norms impeding them. I know it's a very typical Victorian thing, but this is pre-Victorian, and it was already there.
I'm going to say one more thing about the plot, but first I'm going to finish with another funny quote. Lady Middleton resigned herself to the idea of it with all the philosophy of a well-bred woman, contenting herself with merely giving her husband a gentle reprimand on the subject 5 or 6 times every day. But
I like the descriptions, yeah.
Yeah, it's written in that witty style, the kind of style you would see a lot with Dickens and things later on,
Yeah, exactly.
But so basically the two girls fall in love, and it turns out, a lot of stuff happens, but it turns out, that Willoughby starts to kind of not speak to her in society then, and he's already married to someone else for money, and then they think the same thing's happening with the other guy, but he certainly seems to be a bit more Edward seems to be a bit more honorable, and the question is really, will it all work out in the end, basically, And, well, it's a romance novel, so you can probably guess whether it does or not, but I'm not going to spoil it.
Okay. So it's not... Okay. So don't give away the
But it's a decent read. It's a decent read.
Okay,
what I
much
preferred... Yeah, it didn't blow my mind. But the next one did, Northanger Abbey.
Ah.
Now, you've read this one, right?
I have read this one indeed, yes, when I was about 16 or so.
Mm.
But indeed, so tell me, what did you think about it? I mean, it's the least popular Jane Austen novel, I believe, right?
That blows my mind, because of the three I've read, it is by far the best. It's also slightly shorter, which means that it doesn't suffer from that thing where either the first half gets boring or the second half gets boring. It flows better.
And guys, let's not forget, so Northanger Abbey was written in 1803, being thus the first novel Jane Austen wrote in complete form, but it wasn't published till after her death, along with Persuasion. So really, it's a kind of a... Yeah. So
it's almost like they didn't think it was worth publishing, and I don't understand why. It's amazing.
Okay, well, I wasn't like mad about it, to be honest. So I want to hear what you think about it. And it's got some good things, and it's got a lot of very modern traits, I find, that are unusual for that time period.
Yeah.
Anyway,
it's also very meta.
It is, yeah, totally. Yeah. So this is the book you would read, guys, if you're into. Well, it's very much your kind of book thing, because you're into you're into all that Victorian literature, and yes, this is a bit pre-Victorian, but you're into 19th literature around Britain. Yeah. And really, guys, this Northanger Abbey is, if you're into that particular niche, Northanger Abbey is talking about that literature niche. What you talk about, Dean, because I know this is your theme, but you can mention it now. So tell me.
So, I mean, it starts out meta. It starts out by saying, we are introducing the heroine, basically. Uh-huh. And it refers to her as such and discusses Catherine Morland, when she's 10, and then when she's 15, she starts curling her hair and all this kind of stuff. And we go through the steps. And it's almost like she's self-aware that she is the heroine. And they're very aware. And she's looking for an adventure story, basically. Now, she also reads a lot. And she reads a lot of, Anne Radcliffe and earlier Gothic horror type novellas. They're usually short.
Your kind of thing.
That's it. I love my Gothic short stories and that kind of thing. And this is the kind of stuff that she's reading.
Yeah.
And she goes to Bath, and they just have like a nice little holiday. Like, let's go to Bath and we'll hang out and we'll go dancing every day and we'll meet some friends and we'll have a jolly old, English time of it. And she meets this other girl who's a bit of a coquette. And I love the coquettes, man. I can't get enough of them.
There you go.
And they just, they start hanging out in the upper rooms. They do some dancing and everything. But she also meets a gentleman. And he's a little bit eccentric. I'm going to give you a quote here. "I have hitherto been very remiss, madam, in the proper attentions of a partner here. I have not yet asked you how long you've been in Bath, whether you were ever here before, whether you have been at the upper rooms, the theatre, and the concert, and how you like the place altogether. I've been very negligent. But are you now at leisure to satisfy me in these particulars? If you are, I will begin directly." And then he begins and asks the questions in order. Have you been in Bath before? And he just asked the questions that he just said he was going to ask. It's very peculiar.
Well,
but she falls in love with him anyway.
It's a parody of English kind of norms at that time, right? Making fun of it.
It is. It's parody.
Yeah, so you can definitely see Jane Austen's
book is
humor.
Incredibly self-aware. Incredibly self-aware. And just the way, so the main protagonist is Catherine, and she meets a coquette called Isabella. And I mean, there's a nice scene where they're sitting around and they see these two gentlemen, and the two gentlemen leave, and Isabella is doing a lot of like, how dare those gentlemen look over at us, but at the same time she's kind of giving them the eye and trying to make them look over. And when they leave, she says, well, we better leave now. Why? Those two gentlemen have just left, But actually, she's glad they've left, but secretly she's wanting to go after them because she's a big flirt, And Catherine's very, very innocent, very naive. And she says, well, why should we leave now? We might catch up with those two gentlemen. And he's like, oh, no, don't worry about that. We won't catch up with them. And then, of course, they do. And there's a lot of that going on where Elizabeth is just trying to flirt and trying to be noticed by the by the gentleman. And of course, unfortunately, she falls in love with Catherine's brother.
Oh, Lord. Oh, Lord.
And that's a problem because, of course, we get the impression that she's a bit of a coquette and she's not the most kind of faithful. And that's going to run into some problems down the line.
Yeah.
And there's another girl they meet called Miss Thorpe, who seems to be, a more trusty friend.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, Catherine falls in love with her brother.
Well, there you go. There you go. I like the way that it's always just a great kind of coincidence. It's always like, oh, she's my best friend, and then, I just fall in love with her brother, and it is.
Yeah, it's very easily done.
Exactly.
But before I tell you what happens there's something I would be remiss if I didn't mention. Uh-huh. This novel is very much in favor of the art of the novel, and there's long passages, in praise of novels. We mentioned that they're reading the Gothic literature, but they're an advocate for novels. I mean, there's a part where Catherine's reading a novel, and it says, "Yes, novels, for I will not adopt that ungenerous and impolitic custom so common with novel writers of degrading by their contemptuous censure the very performances to the number of which they are themselves adding." So there was a problem in this kind of time period where reading novels was almost trashy. People should be reading non-fiction works, reference books, sermons, geographies, whatever, histories. You shouldn't be just reading a novel. There was no intellectual value in that. They saw novels almost like you're watching. Yeah, it was almost like you're playing video games instead of studying.
Yeah, totally. But don't forget, this is a very kind of Protestant notion of, particularly Calvinist. Like, as soon as you enjoy yourself, you're committing a big sin and you're being immoral. And the thing is, novels are mainly there for entertainment, and more back then than it is now. Actually, now it's becoming a mix. That people don't realize that novels back then, guys, was primarily a form of entertainment, as well as high art. But that was the first intention. And then if you got like a Calvinist or a Protestant kind of nation, as you would have in the UK, then they would say like, "Oh, look, you're having too much fun there. Would you not like to read a nice sermon and get yourself ready for life?" So it's always about self-educating yourself and becoming a kind of everyone had to become kind of like their best lawyer. It's that kind of time period. And the best doctor is always very studious time. It was a very studious time period. And tell me this thing, I believe also it was seen as a very womanish thing, whatever that means. I mean, no idea what they meant really, but it's kind of often seen like, oh, well, that must be a woman who had too much time on her hands to read these.
Yes, it would have been. It would have been a richer woman who obviously wasn't having to do her own kind of housework or things.
Exactly. Yeah.
And she has the leisure to read a novel. And obviously they thought maybe she's not as bright as the men. She's not studying as much, so she can just sit around and read novels. And that's,
it's ironic because nowadays we think that person must be very bright if he's reading a book.
That's completely different than what they thought then. If you were reading a novel, that was almost unintellectual.
Totally right. Crazy.
You should be, get out the prayer book again. Read something that's going to benefit you. That was kind of their vibe.
That was the idea, right?
So what happens is they go to, well, I guess you guessed it. They go to Northanger Abbey. She falls in love with her friend's brother, and they all invite her over to spend some time with the family, the dad, the general, at Northanger Abbey. And of course, the brother, he just teases her. He's like, it's an old abbey. It's going to be spooky. And he teases her with all this type of stuff that she's been reading in her Gothic stories. And then we get to a part of the book where it's essentially a parody of Gothic literature. And she's sneaking around the house and she's afraid what's in that old chest there. Maybe there's going to be some kind of clue to a tragedy that happened in the house. And she's afraid of a lot of things. And then, of course, it's all bunkum. It's all nonsense. They're just living in a very normal house,
And that's the other thing about this, guys. It's kind of like... again, it's very meta-esque because if you see films and books, I'm just thinking of Kick-Ass, for example. That's a film about people wanting to become heroes. And in the same sense, Northanger Abbey didn't start that. It started that trend for a general audience because you had that before and to some extent with novels such as Don Quixote. So these are people who love their novels, and will later be done also in Madame and in Flaubert, Madame Bovary. You
Totally,
have
yeah.
novelists who love novels and thus have people in their own novels saying they want to live like the novels they read. So it's all about novelists talking about novelists and novel lovers in the book. And basically, she's doing the same thing Don Quixote is doing. So Don Quixote read a lot of adventure books, and he wanted to become a knight in 16th century Spain, more or less. But he wanted to become a knight as it was maybe 500 years ago. And in the same sense, the character of Northanger Abbey wants to become part of a Gothic story because she loves it so much. So Catherine wants to, not Catherine, not Catherine. Yes, Catherine. Sorry,
It was Catherine. Yeah, yeah.
Catherine Morland wants to become. She wants to live inside a Gothic novel, become that heroine, as you mentioned, Dean. And that was very unusual at the time. It was done with Don Quixote, as I said, but it was very unusual still for a time for mainstream literature to have people in it who actually read novels and wanted to be in a book. And it kind of also showed you this is not an adventure book. It's kind of like, it's just, this is kind of real life, as in Don Quixote, but it's these people trying to live a fictitious life.
And of course, it falls into a romance book, the same as everything from this time period eventually did. But just that first half where it's the sort of, it's the pseudo-Gothic book, and it's so self-aware with her being the heroine and her wanting her adventure. I mean, I struggle with this to this day, wanting to live inside these Victorian novels and these romance novels, There you go. That kind of grip on fiction.
I can totally see why you like this book, yeah. Now, my criticism is that when I read it, I found it all a bit tedious, to be honest, because it is very meta, guys. So it's maybe something you would love if you actually know Gothic literature very well. And in your case, then you're the expert. But I'm just thinking for the mainstream reader, I can kind of understand that maybe Pride and Prejudice, for example, might be a bit more readable because it's a bit more straightforward rather than meta. So it has its ups.
Yeah, it's more straightforward. Yeah.
It has its ups and downs, but it is very. It has some great descriptions, parodying Gothic literature. But I believe Jane Austen also had some criticism regarding Gothic fiction. I mean, she talks about in the book. She talks about there's actually a list of books called the Northanger Horrid novels. All right. So basically what it is that Isabella Thorpe gives Catherine a list of 7 books because she read The Mysteries of Udolpho. With The Mysteries of Udolpho, by the way, guys, is like the main sort of Gothic novel at the time, and Radcliffe's considered a classic. But these horror novels are basically 7 novels that for a long time people thought Jane Austen just invented. And they're actually now rediscovered. And they're actually being reprinted. I mean, the thing about this is that it was seen, Jane Austen was kind of criticizing these 7 novels a bit for being too stereotypical Gothic. But now, because Jane Austen is so popular, she actually revived her popularity, revived these 7 novels, which were forgotten for a while, and people are reading.
I get it, because I now want to go read Udolpho, because it's one I haven't read, and so she's done that.
And that's a popular one, but there were these 7 other ones that are not popular, and people want to read them as well. Like, no one knew what the hell the Castle of Wolfenbach was by Lisa Parsons, for example, but now it's being reprinted, and that's great. So I really love that books. Jane Austen really wants to support literature. She also criticizing these books, to be honest, but she really wants to support and homage.
She really is criticize specific books if you want, or subgenres, but she is an advocate for the novel as an art form, and as not being something base, as being a worthwhile pursuit and nothing to be embarrassed about. And that I think that's one of the things that really attracted me to this book, and I enjoyed it more than her others.
Yeah, totally get it. As a book lover, it's more your kind of book. Totally good. Yeah. So have a read, Northanger Abbey.
Now, you might have something to say about the next one, PJ. I moved on. We moved a little bit forward in time to 1835, but actually the novel's set in 1819, so we're back where we started. It's Old Goriot by Honoré de Balzac.
Oh, yeah, I love the book. Yeah, oh my God, it's a great book. Now, that's a book I love. I mean, Northanger Abbey is good. It's got a bit of my nerves, but Old Goriot, guys, it's just Le Père Goriot. It's sublime. Set in Paris in 1819, written 1834 to 35. It's part of Honoré de Balzac's novel sequence La Comédie Humaine, so the human comedy. And Honoré Balzac really started off this trend, or at least really strengthened this idea of let's do a series of novels that would depict a whole society during a specific time period. And that is a trait belonging to realism. So basically, Honoré Balzac started off as one of the first realist novelists, because realism is about, realism. I mean, what does that mean? Because you think, oh, that's just realistic portrayals, but realism is realism basically is a reaction to romanticism. So there's romanticism, yes. Sir Walter Scott. But if we're moving to France now, it's Victor Hugo with Les Miserables, for example. Romanticism is all about, it's going back to the humanist idea of the man can do everything. I'm afraid not woman, still very sexist kind of time. Man can do everything, anything. And also this idea of like, it's set in exotic backgrounds. Sir Walter Scott, Victor Hugo, they take very exotic backgrounds. That's why Shakespeare became popular again during Romanticism. But Balzac, by the way, who was a guy who just sat in his room all day writing. He was such an obsessive writer. He just wrote from 7 p.m. till the early hours of morning, nonstop drinking coffee. Very unhealthy life, but he did write a huge amount of books. I mean,
so many.
Few authors have actually managed to. He actually died eventually just because of ill health at age 51, just because of too much coffee and too much writing. He can overdo it, but he did leave a legacy. And this was, the idea was, I'm going to portray the time period in which I grew up in. And most realist authors, realism appearing around this time, 1830s, strengthening around 1840s was Dickens, 1850s. But most realist authors stay in their own territory, what they know best, and talk about the time period usually that might have happened 10 years before, not usually the time period in which they live in. But
that's very common around this time. Yeah,
but they're more like reporters. They're more reporter authors than your romantic author. The romantic author just like takes never having visited Saudi Arabia, a romantic author would just say, "Oh, this is what I imagined Arabia about. I'm not going to investigate."
Yes. Based on nothing.
Exactly, but a realist author would actually do the opposite. A realist author would have first of all almost definitely have lived in this time period, in this space, and if he's writing in a latter time, this is set in 1819. But he wrote this in 1834, 35. So Balzac probably left a lot of notes from that time. These people would write a lot of notes. They would investigate what happened 10 years before, talk to people. They wouldn't get back too far in the history, just enough that what they themselves remember. And it was interesting for two reasons, because that's what probably made these books popular, because at the beginning, a realist novel depicting the exact year it was published was not interesting for most people. It was more interesting. People love to talk about the past. And if it's set 20 years before, that's what made it popular. And don't forget, guys, in the end, these novelists, they did have to make a living. So they kind of had to compensate. I mean, if Balzac had the money, if Balzac didn't have any monetary problems, I'm wondering if he just would have written about last year, not 15 years ago. Anyway, that's a bit of background now, guys. La Comédie Humaine wants to portray French society, just post-Napoleonic French society. So 18 teens moving on to 1830s, around that time period. So Bourbon Restoration time. And it's realism, guys. So it's trying to really depict that time period, capture the essence, but also goes down to minute detail, particular in characters and geography as well. And this is a reason why some people find it tedious, because they're often very long novels. And this is, I'll let you talk about that. I'll let you talk about the plot and a certain Mr. Charles Dickens. But anyway, Dean, you want to talk about those two? Because that's your thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think I have to preface, I think that if it's not clear enough, it should be clear from what you said, but if it's not clear enough, if you are someone who likes romantic books, I wouldn't read this. This made me sad.
Yeah, totally.
It's too real, actually. It's gritty. Now, you may remember on one of our earlier episodes, I reviewed another Balzac book, Cousin Bet.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I would definitely say read Old Goriot before reading Cousin Bet, because
Right.
Old Goriot actually does a bit of world building, in the sense that it's not as gritty, it's not as extreme, but it gives you insight into that world. Because they're all, as you say, they're all a kind of big series, the human comedy. They're all interlinking.
Hmm.
Cousin Bet is what is the more extreme end. It's very, very, very realist, very gritty, and incredibly depressing. And just the morality is so lacking. This book is not as bad as that.
Yeah, and it's not necessary, guys, to start off with the human comedy from the first book you ever wrote, because it doesn't seem to have been such a conscious thing at the time that Balzac would go back to these characters. He kind of seemed to have realized after writing a few novels that he's actually interlinking them. But this is the first book from the human comedy, where it starts, other characters appear. All right, so other characters start appearing from other notes in this book for the first time. So in that sense, it's the first true human comedy novel, but not the first novel from this whole universe that would eventually be officially be called the human comedy.
Yeah. Now I have to say, I almost disliked Cousin Bet because it was too much for me. This book I really, really enjoyed.
Oh, it's awesome.
At the end, and again, I'm not going to tell you why or what happens at the end, but I just need to mention that I broke down and wept at the end of this book, and it's that powerful. And Dickens doesn't make me do that. No one else makes me do that. Even the authors that I love, but this book made me cry. It was too much at the end. It almost builds into the same kind of world then as the others. So we have this chap Rastignac, and I didn't realize till after I read that he actually appears in a lot of the human comedy books. He's one of the more common characters that will pop up.
Who's interesting, yeah.
But he's living in a boarding house, and he's basically trying to fight off corruption, trying to fight off moral corruption in the world around him, whilst also advancing himself in society. That's what he's trying to do. But unlike the people in Cousin Bet, he doesn't give in and just fly off the rails in the most immoral possible way. He tries really hard to actually resist temptations. And he is, at least in this novel, I can't say what happens to him in the future, I find him likable,
Oh, yeah. Well, I have to
I'm going to give you a quick quote that will give us an idea of the world. So, yesterday dancing at a duchess's ball, this morning visiting a moneylender. From the highest arc of fortune's wheel to the bottom of the social ladder, behold the progress of Parisian women. If their husbands can't support their unbridled extravagance, they sell themselves. If they can't do that, then they're ready to tear the living vitals from their mothers to get the cash to make them shine. There's nothing they won't do. It's this depressing society of, needing to keep up appearances and be the rich, aristocratic Parisian girl, like, at all costs, even if you've got to screw over everyone else on your way to kind of get there. And it's a lot of people living off other people's money and paying their mistresses, and a lot of cheating, a lot of that kind of stuff goes on. It's just par for the course.
In fact, there is a French word that actually that means a social climber. So there's a word for social climber in French that comes from a character in Under Balzac. So this whole idea of like, you have to really try hard and to make your way up the ladder of the world is in French an actual word that comes from the name of the character you just mentioned, Rastignac. In French, Rastignac is a person willing to do anything to achieve what he wants to. So which indicates, Dean, I'm afraid that Rastignac might not remain.
He might
innocent.
he might not save face for long. At least in this novel, he does manage to fight off some of the temptations, but it's unfair because in this society, no one else is fighting off temptations. He's the only person who does. And then he went and put him in too many novels. Come on, give the guy a chance. Like, he can only fight it off so many times.
I think that's interesting because it kind of shows you, like, even the most innocent, naive character will eventually become corrupt. And I think that's an important point. Why he should be naive at the beginning. He's still young, but at the end of the novel, he does get disappointed with the notion of well, I can't say too much, but it's particularly about marriage and relationships that really and familiar family relationships that really would make him a pessimist at the end. So I can imagine continuing reading all the novels and him becoming more and more corrupt. A bit
Yeah,
of a better
I think
call.
I want to read more of these. I want to see his downward progression. Actually,
Guys, he's a bit of a Better Call Saul character, right? So heart in the right place, but how much can you push a guy living in such a harsh society? How much can you push him? An honest law student, but he might be breaking bad eventually. So just keep reading La Comédie Humaine. And what you mentioned, Dean, is very interesting because it's funny, the description, and yes, it's tragic maybe, but I'm not sure if you agree, but I think it's a very funny novel, but not the last half, because I remember reading it also, guys, and really, I didn't cry, but I was rarely so hooked in a book.
Oh, you're hooked, yeah.
Yeah, and rarely, and even more rare, hooked to such an old book, because I mean, some books that hook you tend to be slightly more modern. It seems to be a more modern trait, like when they want to hook you, they didn't try that too much, I find, in the old books. But this one is just, you can't start reading, and it becomes a bit of a monologue for a long time. It's just 60 pages of it, but you can't get enough. It sounds really dull, but actually you can't get enough of the 60 pages of weeping. The character kind of metaphorically weeping, and you're kind of weeping along. And it becomes very dark, but at the beginning, and it's very funny, actually. It's and that's what I want to say about realism. Realism incorporates a lot of humor, because Charles Dickens read Balzac, and he started writing around that time period, 1835, but he would have written Balzac's earlier books. And Benito Pérez Galdós, who is the Spanish equivalent of Balzac and Dickens, the main realist author in Spain, who I love, also incorporates a lot of humor into his realism, and also starts off his own equivalent of La Comédie Humaine. And in some sense, Dickens does as well. Dickens has a kind of a Dickensian universe going on. They all are influenced by this one person called Honoré de Balzac. That's why it's so important.
That's it. So what we effectively have here is, we need to say who old Goriot is. Papa Goriot, Père Goriot, whatever you want to call him. So is this old guy they're all in a boarding house together, and they all kind of think he's just an old fool, basically. He's an old fool, but they don't trust him because they think he has more money than he's letting on, and he's a miser. And then these two girls come to visit him, and they think, he's actually, he's got some mistresses, he's a rich old fool. And it turns out early on, no, they're not mistresses, they're his daughters. And this poor guy, basically worked his ass off his whole life, gave all his money to his two daughters, got them well married, and now he's living in a cheap boarding house, and he doesn't care because he's thinking, as long as my daughters are happy, I live vicariously through them. And then the daughters treat him like crap, and they won't even visit him. They're ashamed to be seen with him because he's poor, but he actually was rich, and it's such a shame.
And it's, to be honest, like a lot of stories afterwards, and in some sense a bit before, was King Lear, for example, and stuff like that. It's about how much can a father offer to his kids. I mean, it's all very well, father is doing the best for the kids, but it's the abuse that kids can do to parents. That's what the main theme of Old Goriot is. Yeah, that's the main theme. It's very tragic, to be honest, because you're going up the social ladder. That's a very big thing in these human comedies. It's about people trying to desperately achieve a better social class, the Rastignacs of the world. It's an actual French word used nowadays in modern French for social climbers. So these are people that live in the society. And as you said, you've got the actual young Rastignac who's not become a social climber quite yet. Just like observing everything, observing this old guy, just offering. He's dying for his daughter. He's actually dying, right? And that's the idea. He's actually just starving himself to death, so they can have nice dresses and stuff.
And the daughters, I mean, they don't come near him. He's an outcast.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, when they need some money to pay, because the daughters are, although they're married, they're also cheating as well, and they have affairs. And all of a sudden, the guy they're having an affair with needs to pay some, gambling debts or something. So it's off to dad to get him to sell his last silver spoon, or, the clothes off his back, just to take every penny you can from the poor, starving old man. And it's thank you today, and then we're not interested in seeing you again tomorrow because we're back. We're fine now,
Wow. Okay. Well, it's a very deep story, guys, and it's, as I said, it's all about trying to ascend social strata, higher social strata.
Yeah. Sorry. So I should say, even in this novel, Rastignac does want social progression.
Yeah.
And he has a cousin who's very influential, a female cousin, and he does go to her, and she introduces him to these two, basically the sister, one of Goryo's daughters. So he ends up getting involved with her, and Goryo's happy enough with that. But he is trying to do some social climbing, but he turns down doing things the wrong way. And we've got this chap Vautrin, and he is also living in the boarding house, and he offers a bad way. He offers the dark way. He's the devil on your shoulder. And he's saying, I can get you this and I can get you this, but, we might have to, someone might die in the process and someone else might get screwed over. And Rastignac, he says, no, I'm not doing that. That's horrible. He doesn't want to take the bad way. And in this novel, he does redeem himself. He considers it, but he makes the right decisions at the end. And he weeps. And he is disgusted by how the two daughters treat Goriot, even the one that he loves. He's disgusted by how they treat him. And he's disgusted by the people around him and just the lack of love, the lack of empathy, that everyone is just out for themselves. He does want to get ahead, but he tries to do it in a fair way.
So, guys, definitely a novel to get into if you want to read, if you want to find out how someone can, like how far can someone describe Paris, describe a certain city so detailed over a long period of novels. I mean, you got 10,000 of pages of Paris from that time period and characters that keep reappearing. It's essentially, you see, the good thing about a long TV series, and look, listen to this, a good thing about a TV series is that at least you can re-enter a character's life again and again. And the novels did this, but the problem is, I think that with modern novels, they don't do that enough. A modern novel, they're not enough serious and they're too superficial. And why people are so binge watching TV series is because I think people have a hunger, especially nowadays, to get to know someone better. And what a better way to do this with the human comedy, which is like the ultimate huge TV series with spin-offs. It's just like the unending Coronation Street, but so much more better, guys. This is the proper Coronation Street.
Yeah, it's Coronation Street, but not garbage, right?
Exactly, not garbage. And we have to mention this, Dean, but Coronation Street wouldn't exist without Balzac and without Dickens, because that is a kitchen sink realism. That's a fancy name for it, but it's basically it's all the same, guys. Realism is about really getting into the grit of things, and yes, it can be messy, and particularly old Goriot really describes the dirtiness of a city which wasn't done before.
It is dirty. This is not Audrey Hepburn's Paris. This is a horrible Paris.
This is a horrible Paris, exactly. Yeah. And Émile Zola with naturalism in the late 19th century goes a step further and not only describes Paris realistically, but hyper realistically. So it's like, if it isn't dirty enough, then it's like Zola will like show you the real scum of like every single dirty corner.
I'm afraid to even encounter this because this is already too much for me.
Well, because naturalism really focuses on the real outcasts of society, whereas realism tries to focus on at least all of them, or if not the lower class in Balzac. But like naturalism actually focuses on like prostitutes and criminals mainly, and it's just, it really gets gritty down there.
Yeah,
very dark.
Very guys, before I move on to the last book that I read, which is The Awful Truth About the Sushing Prize, I'm just going to take 2 minutes to do some housekeeping. So I just want to say hello to everyone listening. We do, of course, have all our podcast listeners. We have people listening through the TNC network, and of course on Radio Oxon in Oxfordshire. So I just want to say hello to everyone, and we do appreciate your support. If you want more of the show, you do, of course, have the Patreon. But do you know that we're getting more and more popular every episode? So that's good to see.
I'm delighted to hear that. Look, guys, delighted that you're listening, delighted to be of service. If there's any questions you have, feel free to just ask us in our social media platforms like Instagram, or we're also available on YouTube and other
Twitter
places
as well. All of those places. There's links to everything on bookspoist.com.
Exactly. So feel free to ask any questions you have actually about literature or anything. Feel free to
and
check
just email
out
us. Bookspoist@hotmail.com. You can just email us as well. I would really, really want to hear what you're reading. And don't forget, I haven't mentioned it in a while, but don't forget, we still have the mystery book giveaways. That's still ongoing. So send us an email, tell us what you're reading. You could win yourself a mystery book from the bounteous bookshelves.
Wouldn't mind winning it myself. Yeah. Wow.
I have something to plug as well, PJ. I was interviewed. I was interviewed on another podcast called Universal. That's Yunaversal. Universal.
Nice.
I was interviewed on the Universal podcast. It went just over an hour, and I just talked about the show and some other projects and things. But if anyone's interested in that, you can of course check that out as well. It was a very fun interview, actually.
Wow, cool, awesome.
The interview was actually done 2 months ago, but it only got released there last weekend, so that's why I haven't mentioned it before.
As a secret.
It was a secret. It was indeed a secret.
Well, thanks for sharing. So, guys, you can check that out.
And we should introduce this month's sponsor. It is, of course, lonelyhouseonthemoors.org. So if you want to get yourself a lonely house on the moors where you can live in almost total isolation, and then a very closed-minded kind of society, and of course go around and experience the mysteries that you have on the moors with howling animals and all sorts. Get yourself to the best estate agent in town, lonelyhouseonthemoors.org.
And if you bring your dad along, he can rest your chin on his knee and hope that he can just give you a smile and stuff. You can live that whole kind of lifestyle.
Spend your whole evening just yearning for recognition while you
parental
sadly
love. Parental love.
Yes. We also do have another sponsor, which I'm going to mention here. So we have an investment center focusing on helping you become more financially independent. We will help you grow your wealth by creating a comprehensive case plan that best suits your goals. Once we do this, we will start diversifying your assets through stocks, bonds, ETFs, and much more. We offer courses on trading stocks, bonds, options, and spreads, as well as setting up an IRA based on your risk tolerance. These courses are part of the subscription for no extra charge. We offer a flat rate of £650 for 12 months of service, and I will put a link to that on the show notes. So anyone who is interested in that type of investment, we do have an actual sponsor, and we can hook you up with a good deal with them.
Okay, it's a good time to think about that, guys. Think about your future, At least inform yourself and check it out. There you go. That's
it. So PJ, I read one more book. It's called The Awful Truth About the Sushing Prize. This was groundbreaking stuff.
Right,
the book is written by Marco Ockram. By the way, Ockram is Marco backwards. Marco Ockram. It's really written, of course, by Denis Shaughnessy. Marco Ockram is the main character, and it's this amazing idea where the character writes the book as it happens around him. He's not omnipotent. He's not omniscient. He doesn't know everything. But he writes the things that happen. That he writes a murder, so now they've got to deal with a murder mystery type investigation. But he doesn't know who did it. He doesn't know the answers.
Right.
Maybe he gets beaten up or they get kidnapped or something. He's part of the story. He's a character within it. He's not all powerful, but he makes the things happen. And I've never seen a book written like this before. Okay. But basically, there's a murder happens, and it is that type of investigation then that we go into. But it's just this crazy story where he writes the things that are happening around him, and everyone else is aware that he's writing them as well.
Yeah,
it's not a secret, and he doesn't physically take out a piece of paper and write it. He just somehow makes it happen.
Right. Okay. Well, cool. Sounds awesome.
It's really, really good. Oh, PJ, I think I hear the telephone ringing.
Oh, wow.
Can you just bear with me a few minutes? I'm going to see who's on the line, and then I'll be right back.
Okay, well, I'd love to hear when you're back. Who won?
Hey, you're through to Books Boys. You got Dean on the line. Who's calling in?
Dean, it's Denis Shaughnessy here, and I must start with an apology because I've asked the operator if they could reverse the charges because I'm in a call box and I haven't got any money. So I'm afraid I'm going to have to ask if you're prepared to pay the charges.
Oh, goodness. I suppose we should have to do it on this occasion because I would actually really love to speak to you having just read your book. It's taking us a little bit over budget for the week, but I think we'll manage. Manage.
Well, I could do some mundane tasks on your behalf to pay for it if you like, to pay my way. I could edit some of your podcasts or come in and wash some of your dishes or do some
Well, the dishes is a good one
laundry.
Because, during this show, we drink a copious amount of tea. So if I just had someone in there just to wash the tea and bring the next one out, that'd be great.
Well, for for your overseas listeners, Dean, it might be important for me to explain that my surname, Shaughnessy, is about as Irish as you can get. And
it is, yeah.
Yeah. And that when I was a kid, of course, the kettle was always on in our house. You know, there was never, ever any absence of tea.
That's it. There's days when I drink close to 20 cups of tea. You know, it is always going every hour at least. And sometimes you make that perfect cup that just makes you want a second one right away. So it's that hour then.
Yeah. And Dean, have you noticed that tea goes better with certain foods than others?
I tend to drink tea with every meal.
Okay.
So I don't know. What are you thinking? Like, which foods would you say it goes particularly well with?
Well, particularly spicy foods. So, you know, if you have like, I'm going to offend you now by saying the term full English breakfast, but we could say full Irish breakfast. You know, so if you have the works for breakfast, tea goes perfectly with that.
Well, yes, it does. Yeah.
Whereas if you have porridge, you know, tea doesn't quite go as well.
No.
Porridge, no.
It does traditionally go well with a full breakfast, but I like a cup of tea with my porridge. I will have porridge for breakfast most mornings, like, you know. Yeah, I just can't get away from the tea, you know, tea with my meal and then another tea immediately after my meal. You know?
Yeah. and it's usually best, Dean, if you have a cup of tea in between the tea that you have with your meal and the tea that you have without your meal.
Of course, yeah. Before, during, after, and between the during.
Yeah.
As many as possible. Well, how are you doing today?
Yeah, Dean, I'm good. I'm very excited about being on the podcast with you. I've researched you a bit. I've been stalking you somewhat. I've concluded that you have a cast of mind that in some respects at least might be similar to my own. And that could be, you know, because of our shared Irish ancestry, who knows? Or it could be because you're a student of philosophy, and I consider myself to be a bit of an amateur philosopher.
Good. You have done your research already. It's coming out there, yeah.
Well, you know, Dean, when you have a person like me on your podcast, you know, standards get raised.
Well, that's it. We're on the premium episode
perfection.
now.
Yeah, perfection is my watchword.
Very good. So, yeah, I take it that you've been listening to the show, and it's really good to have you call in.
Well, it's my pleasure. I have listened to all the episodes.
Oh, wow. That's very dedicated. Even I haven't listened to all of them. You know?
Dean, what a shocking admission. Fancy.
No, I jest. I've listened to them all twice over. You know.
Dean, do you edit them?
Yes. So I listen to them all. You know, obviously I record. Then I listen as I'm editing, and then once the podcast uploads, I'm always the first person to download it and listen back again.
Okay.
Because I got to make sure that finished product is actually. Oh, I forgot to edit out something, or you know, it's got to be right.
Yeah,
so.
It's got to be perfect. Yeah.
And luckily, that's been fine. With the old show I did years ago, there was definitely times where I had to pull the episode back down again because there was 5 minutes in the middle of me, you know, making a cup of tea and forgetting that I was on air or something. I've never done that yet on this show. Once it goes out, it stays out, but I still always double check. Cool. Well, I think we need to tell people a little bit about you, because although you've been stalking us, the listeners have not been stalking you, I guess. So do you want to tell us what you do?
Well, Dean, since you and PJ are both philosophers, I thought I might present a tough philosophical conundrum to you, because I was going to describe myself as an internationally acclaimed author of cult novels. And it struck me that you and PJ as philosophers might be interesting people to whom I might pose the question, how many adherents does a cult have to have before it can claim to be a cult? So if I was the only follower of my cult novels, for example, could I claim I was a cult? Or do I, you know, how many followers do my novels have to have before I can legitimately claim they're cult novels?
I think you can have a cult of one, you know?
Okay.
All you need is a devout following. If that devout following is just yourself, less than ideal, but I think it's still a cult following,
Okay. So technically, I'm the author of cult novels. Then, in that case,
technically, you are, yeah. Although I should say, I really, really enjoyed the Sushing Prize. I mean, if that's a cult novel, I'm happy to say that I'm going to join that cult.
So we're a cult of at least two.
At least two of us. Yeah.
But if we're doing like an evidence-based review of the books, we could say there's at least two. And I'm very, very lucky, Dean, and very, very touched by the fact that I also have a number of people on Twitter who've read books that are written supposedly by Mark Wackram, who love them too. So I think that the two of us are not the only people in the cult. I'd be fibbing if I said the cult was like a massive one with billions of people, but there's certainly more than just you and me in it.
Well, thankfully. I'm glad to hear it. To hear it. I mean, I have to ask you, I guess, I don't want to be a stereotype. It's probably the most obvious question to ask you, but like the way that you write is incredibly original and creative. And just, what made you choose that style?
Oh, wow. Well, it's very nice of you to say that, firstly, Dean. And I think it came about, I've always written, I know that's a cliche too, that everybody says they always like to write. And I wrote a number of conventional thrillers that I still probably have somewhere around the house. And I sent, I think, one or two of them to some agents and got knocked back. And I looked at all the advice. I decided, right, I'm going to take this seriously and I'm going to do some research. And I looked at all the advice that was available to writers on the internet. And I was kind of appalled by it because it all seemed to be encouraging people to write the same sort of stuff in a very middle of the road way. And I thought to myself, crikey, how on earth am I going to stand out? So early on, I took the decision that I wanted to write something that was utterly different from everything else. And the question then is, okay, if that's what I want to do, what exactly shall I write? And I started to write a book, which was an example of a book that broke every kind of accepted rule of literature, that made all the mistakes you could imagine. And I had great fun doing it, but after I'd finished it, I realized that actually it was so bad that anybody who looked at it might think I was a genuinely bad author. So they might read it and think this guy's a total idiot. And I thought, well, how am I going to get around the problem? How am I going to make people realize that this awful writing I'm doing is deliberate rather than a natural product of my own incompetence? And I very quickly realized that one way to do it would be to make the narrator comment on his own awfulness. Mm-hmm. And very quickly, I found myself in this position where I'd created this author come protagonist called Marco, who was writing a book that in certain respects would be, if you're an objective robotic reviewer, you would say that is an awful book. But as the narrator, he kind of foregrounded all of his shortcomings and all of his mistakes and all of his errors to make you realize that they were deliberate rather than accidental. And that's how it came about, So I invented this way of writing. And Dean, I have to confess that I still haven't come to terms with it. I've invented this way of writing books that, as far as I know, I've researched it to death. And as far as I know, nobody else has done it before. And I still can't believe that nobody else has done it before. I still can't believe that I've thought of something new, because you'd think everything had been done before.
You would. I mean, it's an incredibly creative, and I did think, my first instinct was, this is a really groundbreaking style of writing. And then I thought, I guess something similar to what you thought. Someone must have done this before. Yeah. And I checked with what I'd read, and I asked, PJ, and no, we couldn't think of anything, Yeah.
So I'm 60. I forget how old I am, Dean. I'm 60 something. Okay, I'm in my very, very, very late 20s. I'm something like 41. And so I'm practical enough to realize that the chance of this becoming famous in my lifetime is pretty low. But on the other hand, I think to myself, it is different. So I'm just hoping that maybe enough people will spot it's different in a nice way, and it might get somewhere. But of course, my principal objective, I should say, my principal objective above all others is to provide something that cheers my readers up. So as much as I'd like to think the books are clever literary experiments, my real hope is that people might just enjoy them and find them a good laugh.
I think that anyone could read it and enjoy it and find it a good laugh. I would hope that, most of those people could also realize that it is really just a very interesting and new way it's a novel way to write a novel. It's a very, very interesting style. And you kind of fall in love with Marco Ockram a little bit. He's, I suppose in some ways, he's a bit selfish. He's a little bit carefree almost to an extent. He doesn't care if, Como misses his football game. He just wants to spice up his own day kind of thing. And, at times he's almost a bit of an ass, but he's kind of a lovable ass,
Yes, indeed. And Dean, again, I've got a confession to make there, because the original incarnation of Marco was not really a likable character. And in hindsight, I did something really, really, really important, which is I paid to engage the service of an experienced editor, a guy called Jonathan Ayres, and I hope he won't mind me mentioning his name in public. And he said to me, he was very encouraging. He confirmed the fact the books were written in an unusual way, strange and unusual way. But he said that I was making a big mistake by making Marco, the main character, an unlikable character. And he said, people will be much more likely to enjoy the book if Marco's a nice character. So I changed. It didn't take much of a change, but I changed Marco around and made him a likable idiot. I remember in one of your earlier podcasts, you and PJ talked about Bertie Wooster. And I know that you weren't a big fan of Bertie Wooster, but to me, Marco has inherited quite a bit Bertie Wooster's DNA. So he's like this idiot who is quite articulate. So he's able, he's a bit of contradiction, because he's quite articulate and therefore able to describe what's going on, which you think was a sign of intelligence. But on the other hand, he's utterly stupid in terms of being able to figure out what's going on and control it. So he is. I hope he's comes across as a lovable idiot.
He certainly does. And I read some of the Wooster stuff, and I thought that it had a really good idea. Something that PJ loved that I didn't was just the particular writing style. It used a lot of abbreviations and acronyms where there didn't need to be any. And that's what annoyed me more than anything else. The world building was beautiful, So I was actually going to say to you, because in this book, and there is a mention of PG Wodehouse, and I was planning on actually asking you, to kind of comment on that. Do you think that it's almost like Wooster wrote a novel sometimes, I feel like, And it's interesting that you kind of had similar kind of thoughts on that. It is a similar style in certain ways, but then, as we said, in other ways, it's a totally new style. But I did get a little bid of that same kind of vibe with the comical aspects,
Yes, yeah. I think I would love to coin the term Ockramism, because the premise of the book is it's being written by this guy called Mark Wackram, who is inventing the story in real time as you are reading it. And he is also kind of inventing his own existence, because although he's the author of the book, he's also his own protagonist. So he's making it up as he goes along. And because of that, because he's writing it in real time, he doesn't have the time to either edit it or to think it through. So he can't think ahead. So he makes all these literary mistakes and gaps as he goes along, and he foregrounds them, which is like totally different to like a normal book. So in a normal book, the author makes every effort he possibly can to polish the work to the point where you don't realize there's an author behind it. You believe it's you can kind of buy into it as being a story. Whereas Marco does the exact opposite. He's constantly putting in your face the fact that he is trying to write this book and he's not very good at it. And Marco, in the role of the character, is suffering from all the stupid decisions that Marco, in the role of author, is making. And in that sense, I think it's a kind of metaphor for real life, because in real life, Dean, we do stuff and we can't edit it and we can't really plan it all out perfectly.
That's true.
So I think of it as Marco as a kind of everyman character, really, that he represents all the doubts and shortcomings that we all experience, and he's just a bit more upfront about it.
I think that's fair, and you're right. That main premise of him writing the world around him is brilliant because he doesn't always know what he's going to do. And I mean, I've got a quote here. The most important thing was whether I fancied Flora enough to spend another 60,000 or so words in her company. I decided it was too risky. Her character was underdeveloped. So admitting that right there, that's amazing. Yeah. That's hilarious.
Yeah.
I love it. And some of the twists, I mean, you may have picked up on kind of going through the show. We typically talk about a novel and we mention some of the stuff that happens near the beginning. We never go too far into it because we don't like to spoil anything. I think that, although I don't mind reading a book that's been spoiled for me, I know that a lot of people, with books and with films as well, like they don't want the ending spoiled, and we try really hard not to do that. But I suppose we can mention sort of a little bit. So we effectively have Marco goes to see Como, believing that there's a new case, and actually they're just going to watch the football. So then, all of a sudden, there is a new case. Marco's written it. There's a new case. Off they go, and a body's been squished by a shipping container. And all the clues that they find lead back to this one apartment. But it goes wild. We've got bits where he sees the Pope. We've got bits where he's in disguise as Tom Cruise. Fires in the warehouse. Like it goes. I don't want to say it goes off the rails because it knows where it's going, but it's a very adventurous story.
Yeah. And I have another confession to make, which is that I do try to write like Marco does. There is one key similarity and one key difference. So Marco, for the benefit of your audience who won't know what we're talking about, Marco is this idiot who has been coached by a literary guru to write in kind of the way that Jackson Pollock painted. So if you think of Jackson Pollock, the author, Jackson Pollock, the painter, he was famous for creating paintings spontaneously, for just chucking paint on the canvas, and his work sells for millions of dollars. And Marco has kind of been coached to do that, to just chuck the words on the page without thinking. And the consequence of that is that Marco makes all these kind of idiotic, stupid decisions about the way in which the book's going. So he's sort of got no control whatsoever over his plot. And as a result of that, all kinds of weird things happen. And in some respects, I follow Marco's logic. So when I reach a point in the book where I have to decide what happens next, I always go with what the first thing that enters my head. So if what enters my head is he meets the Pope, I think, right, okay, he's going to meet the Pope, and I've got to make that work. So part of my writing process is exactly the same as Marco's. Whenever I reach a branching point in the plot, I go with what the very, very first thing that comes into my head. The difference between my approach and Marco's approach is Marco will tell you that he just types everything and never edits it. But actually, the amount of editing and rework and, endless polishing, it just never stops. It is very, you'd think it might be easy to just write the first thing that comes into your head, but actually, it's really difficult,
It's difficult, yeah. I think you pick up on that, There's times where you think, okay, obviously there's some deliberate mistakes and things, and then you realize, well, the style of the writing is not just there to hide mistakes. It's actually creative, and the mistakes are part of this, like they're deliberately put
yes.
part, and then you realize there's like a whole second kind of layer of it, because it's not laziness, it's actually extra work. Like
yes, yeah. I mean, a great example of that is in the next book, the second book that comes out. Marco, it's a spoof on The Name of the Rose. Have you ever read
The Name of the Rose? Yeah,
by Umberto Eco, which is a novel that is set in a medieval monastery. It's like a Sherlock Holmes adventure set in a medieval monastery, and there's all kinds of postmodernist references to Sherlock Holmes in Umberto Eco's book. And in Marco's second book, he reprises Umberto Eco's Name of the Rose by having a retreat in a celebrity retreat that's run like a medieval monastery. So Marco goes to this place, and at one point, something dreadful happens, and one of the monks comes racing into the foreground, screaming. It's Stan. Stan has come amongst us. We're all doomed. Stan has come amongst us. And Marco and the abbot in this monastery and everybody else is going, who's Stan? Who on earth is Stan? And then Marco realizes that actually it's just a typo, and that Stan should be Satan. So he then rewrites everything and said, "Oh, it's Satan. Satan has come amongst us." So that's like a typical Marcoism, where he kind of makes a mistake because he's writing stuff as he goes along in real time, and he's so stupid he goes along with his own mistake until suddenly he realizes it, and then he tries to put it right. Whereas in a real book, of course, if you accidentally type Stan instead of Satan, your editor would pick it up and it would be fixed before the readers ever saw it.
And what's curious is that the people around him, it's not like he's writing the book and he's writing the world they're in, but the others don't know. They all know it.
Yes,
and
they do.
In the court scene, they say, well, I had his defense is basically I was trying to avoid the Deus Ex Machina happening too early in the story, and they say, oh, well, that's a plausible defense,
Yes. So, and I think Dean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think this is my third confession so far. This maybe I'm going back to my Irish roots, speaking to you, and think, and I'm got into this confessional mode as if I'm talking to a priest or something. But I confess that at least is in part lifted from Flann O'Brien. I don't know if you've read any of his books, particularly At Swim Two Birds.
I haven't.
Okay, well that's worth reading. But the idea of an author interacting with his characters who are conscious that they are characters, to some extent they're conscious of their characters at least, is something that in part I blatantly copied from him. And in Marco's books, the way I've tried to write it is that the characters who are most aware that they are characters are the characters who appear most. So the very minor characters, they behave like normal characters in books, whereas Como, who's Marco's main character, he's the one who is most aware that he is a character. So he's the one who's most collusive with Marco the author rather than just with Marco the character. Yeah.
And I think Como gets annoyed with him, but he loves him really.
Yeah. Well, I love that about the book. I should say that I love all my characters, and I think if you're going to be an author, loving your characters is a huge advantage. And one of the things I love about Como is that on the one hand, Marco drives him nuts, but on the other hand, he's like really protective of Marco and faithful to him. And that idea of someone who is driven nuts by you but remains faithful to you, I find very moving might be too strong a word, but I think it's a very endearing human characteristic that that some people can drive us nuts, but we love them still,
My favorite aspect is actually the sort of the pride and the pomp that he has, and just the amount of people that love him, and he can't go anywhere without people asking him to sign an autograph. Or he meets the Pope, and it's a pleasure meeting your Supreme Holiness again. I acknowledged his words with humility, like it's the Pope saying that to him. No matter what happens, everyone's asking him. Oh, and he was obviously a physicist before he was an author, so they're complimenting his physicist work, or they're asking him to sign a copy of the Herbert Quarry Affair. It's always just heaping praise on him. I love that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, tell me this. One thing I like to ask everyone is, what have you been reading lately?
Oh, well, I live on a small holding, Dean, and the reason that's relevant to mention is that when you have a small holding, it's like an endless amount of labour that you have to do. So I'm always working outside. And so as a result of that, I have very little time to read physical books, but I do listen to stuff a lot on my phone. And I have been listening to a huge number of books and other kinds of things, podcasts like yours, on my phone. One book that I've listened to really that I've found really good, and indeed I found it better as a podcast than as a physical book, was The Remains of the Day by Kashiguro, which is a story about a guy who was a very prim butler who has been working for some people between the wars who misguidedly are seduced by Hitler and the Nazi movement and so on. And he feels, I think he feels in a way a degree of pride about his role and his employer, a misguided degree of pride. And eventually he realizes, I think, that the way he has lived his life has been a very empty way. And the book that I listened to was narrated by a guy, I think, called Simon Preble. And with hindsight, that guy does such a brilliant job of narrating that book that it was just amazing. And as soon as I'd listened to it all the way through, I immediately listened to it again, which just goes to show you how moved I was by it.
Straight back to it for a second go.
Yeah. And then a few of the things I've been listening to, I have been, I love the idea of making my books into movies, Dean. Mm-hmm. And I'd started to develop a screenplay for one of the books because I'd been encouraged by some of the people on the internet who'd read them and thought it would be a good idea. And instigate the whole kind of movie business. I found out that it was as unlike the book writing business as you could possibly imagine. It was very prescribed. There were very, very, very well established conventions about story structure and so on. And so I've had this like open mouth fascination with the conventions of screenplay writing. So I've been listening to probably about 100 hours of advice from Hollywood gurus about how you write screenplays. And some of the advice, I should say, is unbelievably prescriptive, to the point where someone like me, I'm a massive iconoclast. I don't agree with any rules whatsoever. And I find
I'd never have guessed.
I find it really funny to read these gurus who say every screenplay should have an inciting incident, and the inciting incident should start on I'm going to exaggerate this a little bit, on the fifth word of the fifth sentence of page 9. This kind of stuff. And I actually think it would be funny in a postmodernist sense to write a screenplay that broke nearly every rule of screenplays, but still adhered completely to all these things, So I'm trying to write a world-breaking screenplay that still has the inciting incidents on word.
It has to break 83% of the.
Yeah.
It is to break 83% of the established rules, right?
Yeah, but comply entirely with the remaining 17%. Yeah.
Very good. And the last question, the famous last question that we like to ask everyone: if there was one book that you wish you had written, what would it be?
Well, Dean, I always wonder why everybody you put that question to doesn't just say Harry Potter, because obviously
they make a lot of money, right?
Yeah. But Dean, are you one of these people who reads certain books repeatedly, or are you one of these people who just reads every book just once?
I have read one or two books twice, but usually I try to read them once. And the reason for that is because there's more to read. Once I finish all the books, maybe I'll start again, but that'll take me another couple hundred years.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Well, it's interesting because I've found that people fall into two camps. There are people who never read a book again, or always want to move on to something new. And there are people who love reading the same books again and again and again.
Yeah.
And I fall into the second camp, So I find that when I've found a book I really like, I love to read it repeatedly. And one book I have really enjoyed, which I would like to bring to the attention of you and your army of listeners, is have you heard of the Brigadier Gerard stories?
Oh, no, I can't say I have, to be honest with you.
Right. Well, I know you like Victorian stories. You've heard clearly of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle.
Of course, yes.
You have, yeah. Well, he wrote these books. And,
right.
And I think they are in a league above of the Sherlock Holmes stories. They're a series of short stories about this, written in the first person by this guy called Brigadier Gerard, who is a retired French cavalry officer whose career was in the French cavalry in Napoleonic times. So he served under Napoleon. And there are a series of short stories about the exploits he got up to when he was younger. And I think they are like real gems of short stories in that they are beautifully written. They have very, very inventive plots. And most importantly, they are very witty. So they're much more funny than the Sherlock Holmes stories are. So the Sherlock Holmes stories are a little bit funny because Watson's relationship with Holmes is a bit funny. But the Brigadier Gerard stories are much, much funnier. And all the humour stems from the fact that Brigadier Gerard is this massive egotist. So he's totally up his own backside. He thinks he's like God's gift to everything, especially God's gift to women and to armies. but he's an idiot. You know, he's a little bit like Marco in that sense. And he gets into all these scripts. They're very, very tall stories, but they're just beautifully written and really clever. And Dean, I would honestly, I would implore you to have a look at them. And
I think I should.
Report back on one of your podcasts.
Yeah, definitely. I'm always looking for new stuff. I mean, at any one time, I have about at least 20 books in my queue, and I have worked out which month, when I'm going to read them and what. I'm very methodical with it. And I need to get always new stuff. I just bought a whole bunch of stuff, but I think I might be able to make an opening and slip one of those in because it sounds very, very good.
Well, they're short stories, so if you do nothing else, just read at least one of them.
Yeah, I think that's easy to do.
Now, to just turn things around a little bit, Dean, tell me about what you're up to and how much time do you spend on the art?
Not as much as I would like. 1 or 2 afternoons a week is probably all I can really put into it, on the weekends or whatever. Not nearly as much as I would like. And I was before, I was doing evening classes and things, pre-COVID, with instructors to learn, how to draw better and things like that. And obviously I haven't been able to do that lately, which is a shame. It's something I did really enjoy, but.
Yeah, well, my flippant recommendation would be to increase your prices by about a factor of 1,000. So where you're trying to sell a painting for 30 quid, I think if you ask for 30,000, I think that would.
That's the way to do it. Yeah, guys. For anyone listening, on booksboys.com, there's a link on the bottom to my paintings. If you want to buy one and then just send me a check for an additional $1,000, work away.
Yeah, why not? Yeah.
Well, Dennis, it has been absolutely lovely having you on the show. It's been great, and we should tell everyone to check out your website, theawfulauthor.com.
Yeah.
And to read the book. I mean, you can read the Sushing Prize, and of course you mentioned also The Name of the Rose. Are we ever going to be able to read The Herbert Quarry Affair?
Well, Dean, it comes out in about what date is it? In about 2.5 weeks' time.
There we go.
Yeah. So it's I'll send you a copy. It's a real groundbreaking book. It's the book that made Marco famous, and I can't guarantee that people who read it will like it, but I absolutely can guarantee that it'll be quite unlike anything else I've ever read. So
I can certainly believe that.
Yeah.
Well, it's been lovely having you on the show. Take care. Have a good evening.
Yeah, look after yourself, Dean. All the best. Bye.
Thanks. Bye. Wow, guys. Dennis Shaughnessy calling in just as we're discussing his book. That's amazing. And don't forget theawfulauthor.com if you want to check out his books.
Awesome. Cool. Well, it sounds very good, the book. I like the sound of it. And it sounds almost Woodhousesian, some of the themes.
You know what? We mentioned there, it is, in some ways, it is actually Woodhousesian. And Woodhouse is mentioned in the book even at one point, Right. So it's Woodhousesian in the style of its humor at times, but it's a really, really groundbreaking approach in some ways. PJ, we're going to take a quick break to play an ad for another great podcast, and then we'll be back in 1 minute to see what you want to talk about.
What we do here is go back.
And we're back. With another episode of
Wait, James. They might not know who we are yet.
Oh, right. This is a promo. Well, I'm James.
And I'm Matt.
And together, we're the Bros and Brews podcast.
We're coming at you every week with worldly discussions, an art meets life questions podcast.
What 3 albums would you take to a deserted island?
How comfortable are you with sex and sexuality?
Is it ethical to have children?
What actually makes a great actor?
We use our personal experiences, the craft of acting, and pop culture as a springboard to discuss everything.
From uncomfortable truths, demonized issues, and problems often swept under the rug.
But don't worry, we have fun along the way.
Come join us for our weekly check-in.
And we'll see you next time.
Peace!
Do you love history? Then this podcast is for you. Every week, Well That Aged Well takes you on a journey through history with new topics ranging from ancient Rome to recent history. Every week, new historians come on the show to talk about new topics. We give you real stories from real historical events. You don't want to miss an episode of Well That Aged Well with Erland Hedgegard. Okay, let's go. So, PJ, why don't you take the floor?
Well, I've been reading a few plays actually this month. Been taking it easy. And these plays are all mentioned in, they're all mentioned on our Patreon website. So we did get into the one and only Hamlet, the tragedy about a man who cannot decide. It's the ultimate existentialist play by William Shakespeare. What I mean by that is that this play is unusual for a time because a man doubting what to do. So basically, it's about a man whose father was murdered, a prince whose father was murdered, and the ghost comes to him and says that your uncle, my brother, killed me, so therefore you must seek vengeance. And young Hamlet doesn't. And that's very unusual for the time. It's very existentialist. It's very kind of modernist in a sense. Oh, I'm not sure if I could do this. I don't want to commit murder. I don't want to do this. He's over rational. He's too much in the head. He's not at all he's not at all a romantic figure. He isn't actually. He's not at all a romantic figure. Just like, oh, well, then I shall seek vengeance for my dad. So it's a great play, guys. It's one of my favorites. And we go into depth in the Patreon website. And we got the idea Shakespeare, old Billy, he's a great lad, isn't he? But sure, he can't be the only great player.
He can't be the only one, right? Yeah.
And then we checked out his peers, including old Kit's Marlowe, Christopher Marlowe. And we were pleasantly surprised, weren't we, Dean, to discover his plays.
Yes, we were.
I have to mention that Dean also read these plays with me.
I also read them, yeah.
Yeah, so like we both discovered Christopher Marlowe, starting off with Dr. Faustus. What did you think of Christopher Marlowe, Dean?
My opinion's interesting. Dr. Faustus was amazing.
Yeah. My God.
I really, really loved it. It was powerful stuff, totally different from anything I've read from Shakespeare.
Yeah.
Which is all of Shakespeare, so very different from Shakespeare. Totally. But I couldn't quite get over that play. Actually, it was a big impact on me.
Yeah.
But then when we read the second one, Tamburlaine, I thought that was a bit more. Yes, it was a good play. Don't get me wrong. We read Tamburlaine Part 1, but it was a bit more back to the Shakespeare style.
Right. Yeah. Totally right. Dr. Faustus really pops out as something really unusual about a man signing a pact with the devil that he could have unlimited powers for 24 years before his soul would be given to the devil. And it's very different. But you read Tamburlaine twice. You actually read Tamburlaine twice because you were so skeptical at first, and the second read was a lot more interesting, right?
Yeah, so the first time I read it, I just felt like I wasn't. Maybe I was wanting something impactful like Faustus again. Yeah. I don't know, but I read it and I felt like I didn't take anything away from it.
Yeah.
So I read it again. I read it a second time, and I took a lot more from it the second time. I enjoyed it more. I understood it a bit more. And we're gonna record that episode of Renaissance very soon. But for now, Faustus, that episode is up, and you can already hear that one.
Definitely.
But yeah, he's different from Shakespeare. But is it fair of me to say that Tamburlaine, although it's a great epic and it reinvigorated, that type of kind of play, is it fair for me to say that, it is closer to Shakespeare than Faustus?
It is, yeah. And Tamburlaine would have been one of the first plays Shakespeare would have probably seen when he first came to London. They're both about the same age, guys. But Christopher Marlowe just started a lot younger and he died a lot younger. And with Shakespeare actually started relatively late, and he lived to be not really a decent age, but a decent age at the time. And yeah, so Christopher Marlowe was very famous and dead by the time Shakespeare was really hitting the builds with all the Henrys, and then eventually Richard III. But Richard III came out in 1895. Marlowe was already dead by then, unfortunately, and he was probably murdered. Marlowe is a lot more of a legendary figure. He was a spy. He was a humanist. He was more of an intellectual than Shakespeare. All that comes across. So Marlowean plays, they're more intellectual. They are, because Shakespeare didn't have that upbringing. They're more intellectual. There's a lot more Latin in them. There's a lot more science in them, especially in Dr. Faustus.
Yes.
But Marlowean characters are not at all like Hamlet or these kind of existentialist characters that you would get with Shakespeare later on, or even in Richard III, which is a young Shakespeare, an early Shakespeare play. It's Richard III is already doubting at the end. It's like a kingdom for a horse and all that stuff, and none of that appears in not too much appears in in Marlowean plays, especially in Tamburlaine, was just about a man who wants to conquer the world. And Dr. Faust is the same thing. It's a man who wants to conquer the dark magic world. These are all people who really, they strive for huge achievements, which you don't get in Shakespeare. It's usually Shakespeare got people who have a lot of weight on their shoulders and are kind of being dragged down by this often, as especially once again in Hamlet or as Romeo and Juliet. So Marlowe is a bit more typical, I think, for the time, Renaissance. But yet he's got this unique sort of dark flair, especially with Dr. Faustus, that was just like, oh my God, this is like, this feels like almost like a Clive Barker or Stephen King kind of story rather than a story written about the 1580s, 1590s.
Yeah.
It's awesome, guys. Really, really recommend it. It was very surprising and very different to Shakespeare. Even Dr. Faustus had included comedy, but even the comedy wasn't too Shakespearean. It was also funny. I think he's an author in his own right. He's often overshadowed by Shakespeare.
And we should mention there's not as many extant plays by Marlowe.
He also died.
Shakespeare wrote a lot.
So yeah.
Yeah. With Marlowe, we only have, am I right in saying 7 plays?
I think it's 7 plays, yeah, and a few books of poetry and stuff. But it's like, they're not even 100% sure if he wrote some of it or not. And of course, there's a whole theory that Shakespeare actually was Marlowe, that all those plays were written by Shakespeare.
I couldn't believe it when I read Faustus. I just couldn't believe that could be Shakespeare. With Tamburlaine, if you told me, I would maybe say, well, maybe, but with Faustus, no, it's impossible.
Maybe, yeah. So yeah, guys, check him out. That's all I want to mention. We'll get more into him, and we're also going to include more Renaissance authors, including Ben Jonson and the like. So just keep in part. That's part of our Playboys episode. Is now divided into Shakespeare and Renaissance. It's a Russian. What's the word again?
Russian dolls are happening with you got the Books Boys, the Bifanda Boys, the Playboys, the Renaissance.
All kinds of nonsense. All kinds of great nonsense. There you go.
And don't forget, we also talked about the Mysterious Affair at Styles on Caper Captains, the Agatha Christie.
Yes, exactly. Yes, we also got Agatha Christie. Thanks for mentioning that.
There's a lot going on. PJ, shall we wrap up with our recommendations today?
All right, so what's your recommendation then?
My recommendation, this isn't going to be much of a surprise to anyone. It's a Charles Dickens.
Of course it is.
Sketches by Boz. Now, Boz, by the way, is Dickens. So his early work, he went by that pseudonym of Boz before he started writing his full novels and became known as himself as Charles Dickens. And his illustrator was Fizz, so it's Boz and Fizz. Sounds like a kind of vaudeville act or something. But what we have here is these are sketches, so they are not. This is not a novel. Okay, these are not even short stories. They literally are just character sketches, sketches of couples, sketches of gentlemen, and certain types of situations around London. Now, I mentioned before that when we spoke to Anne last month, I mentioned that Dickens would walk around London of an evening, and all the characters that he saw informed his novels. And what this is, Sketches by Boz, is essentially world building. So it's introducing you to the types of character archetypes that you're going to see in all the novels that are about to come.
So
setting the scene for everything.
It's setting the scene. It's basically him practicing, and he was a very young author, so it wasn't really. He didn't have the maturity. It was just kind of very practicing. How to become a proper realist. Writer. Wow. Yeah, and don't get me wrong, they're funny and they're witty. Obviously, they're not plot heavy because they're just a couple of pages at a time, But they're just these sketches of characters, and you start to realize these are the kinds of people we're going to see in his actual novels. So for anyone that does have that kind of interest in Dickens, I would really recommend, because it is often overlooked, but it's a really, really good collection of sketches. Great, awesome. And guys, I actually recommend another realist author. So we're all about realism today. And I suppose it's because we've been talking so much about Balzac. I mentioned Benito Pérez Galdós earlier. So he's considered the Spanish equivalent of Dickens, of Balzac, of Tolstoy, in that he is the big realist author in Spain and in the Spanophonic Spanophonic world. It's quite popular. He's not majorly popular in the Anglophone world, but he's slowly actually getting some recognition. What he has, but perhaps it's also because Benito Pérez Galdós is not particularly original, maybe. So he wasn't the first realist author. He got a lot of influence from, as I said, Balzac in particular. And he didn't write his first book until 1870, having been born 1843. So Dickens already wrote sketches and Oliver Twist by that time. But Spain always being a bit late, to be honest, with the trends. It was not until the 1860s, more late 1870s, that 1880s even, that realism became a thing in Spain. And Benito Pérez Galdós started that. And he's actually was born in Gran Canaria. And I was born in the same city. So there you go. But he's considered by many the second most important novelist in Spanish literature, beside, of course, Miguel Cervantes, author of Don Quixote. And
now, when I visit you in Gran Canaria, hopefully soon enough, we're going to do the first ever in-person Books Boys, eh?
Oh, yes, that would be great. And I'd love to show you his house. I've been to Benito Pérez Galdós' house, which is now a museum.
Wow.
And it's great, yeah. Anyway, that would be great, yeah. I love Benito Pérez Galdós. I had to read him at school. I went to school in Gran Canaria, but I was one of the few who actually loved his works. And I read the two books that, I read the book basically that I was told I had to read, and then I read a lot of other books. And by the time the second book came that I had to read, I already read that. I didn't have to read. I was a big fan of him. But he started writing 1870s. So yes, he is basically imitating Dickens and Balzac. But he's got his own unique flair as well, his own stories, I would say, with the Spanish setting. There's a lot more Catholicism involved inside, like the Spanish history. So when Balzac was portraying Parisian society and Dickens English, Galdós wasn't only portraying Spanish society, but he also did a whole series of novels called Los Episodios Nacionales, which are 46 novels. So almost being as huge as the Human Comedy, but they're a bit shorter than books. And the Episodios Nacionales, national episodes, are all about Spanish history, in the 19th century, starting off with Trafalgar, the Battle of Trafalgar, around 1803, I believe. So moving on to the end of that century. I love characters appear in it, but it's not so much depicting a society and a city at the time as it is like the whole history in novel format. So people could just read the stories rather than have to learn it in a dry sense. So anyway, sorry, I went on a bit about him, but I want to recommend one of my favorites novels from his before he became a proper realist, which was in the 1880s. In the 1870s, he was still into his romanticism, even though it was way past its time. And I really like his early romanticist literature that he wrote in his 20s. And one of my favorite novels is Doña Perfecta. And that's my recommendation for today, guys. It's romantic, but it's getting towards realism already, in the sense of like it's about a marriage of convenience and how wrong it goes and how much the church ruins the lives of these people in the novel. And Doña Perfecta is kind of like a bit ironic because she kind of has to be perfect. I mean, that's her name. That's an actual name in Spanish. But yes, Perfecta, whose name Perfecta also kind of has to be kind of perfect. And it's about pressure. Realism is often about pressure. And again, it's in this case. But he's got just as much humor as Balzac and Dickens, if not even more, I find. So this makes Galdós sometimes an even more pleasant read than Balzac.
I need to get reading
Dickens.
some of this.
Yeah, this is your kind of stuff. I very recommended it. So yeah, in contrast, his latter novels at the turn of the 19th century towards the 20th century become very naturalist, like in Zola. So it's not if it's too much for you, Dean, because it goes into like poor people and like people dying and stuff, and it becomes very gritty towards the end.
Yeah.
But
it's hard for me to take a recommendation because at the moment, or at any given time, I have about 30 books queued up on my shelf, in order, and I know when I'm reading what, and it's very difficult to fit more stuff in,
Well, guys, but if you want a depiction of Spain in the 19th century, realist, but also still kind of romantic, romantic sort of flair, it's Doña Perfecta. And if you want a more gritty realist depiction, then his latter books are also great, but I just enjoy his earlier ones more. They have more humor. his early ones. I really enjoyed that.
Cool. Guys, I think that's pretty much us. So look, let me just conclude by saying all the info, all the stuff that we do, whether you're looking for Patreon, whether you're looking for our social media, or you just want to, leave a comment, whatever you want to do, booksboys.com. That's your central portal for all our kind of stuff. We're going to end with a song today, and now this is interesting because PJ doesn't know what we're going to end with.
Yeah,
but this is actually a song by PJ. But you sent me some of your new stuff by my request to play, but I've not done that, PJ.
Oh.
Do you remember a song you recorded with myself back in 2013?
Good Lord.
Called Dean and PJ Sure Have Some Sexy Ice Cream.
Oh, I think I do, actually.
Yeah. It's one of the first songs we did together when we were doing Free Love Freeway. And you sang it, you played guitar, you played harmonica, you did backing vocals. I joined you on the backing vocals, but it's 99% you. And it's a funny little blues kind of parody, basically. And it's a nice little ditty, and I thought I'd remind you of that one, because it's long forgotten.
Nice. Okay, cool. Thanks a lot for getting that out of the archives. Awesome.
I've been going through my hundreds of songs that I've been involved with to kind of find my new album, which will come out eventually, called The Dozen Most Listenable. So, take out the garbage and here's the 10% that's left,
Wow, okay. Well, looking forward to hearing that then. Awesome.
So, guys, that's it. We will be back in about a month.
Okay, guys. Take it easy, guys. See ya.
Books Boys was presented by The Dean and PJ Burke in association with Thaddeus Penguin Productions. This episode was brought to you by our sponsor,
lonelyhouseonthemoors.org.
If you would like to get in touch, you can email us at booksboys@hotmail.com or visit us at booksboys.com. The intro uses Driving in the 70s from the Of Soundtracks and Garage Bands EP by Trapdoor. And the outro uses Dog's Light by Bravo Max from the album of the same name. All music used is either PodSafe or used with permission. If you'd like to support the show, click on the Amazon or Audible referral links on booksboys.com or go to patreon.com/booksboys and get all of the Bufanda Boys bonus shows. Thank you kindly for listening to us. Please tell your friends and come back next time for another episode of Books Boys. Read some books!
Remember, PJ, that song was from the Sexy Hair EP, and I did a rap on that, and then we did a cover of Ricky Gervais' Free Love Freeway. I don't even know what was going on there. Also, why is the show almost 2 hours long? What the hell?